Meanwhile, the AU Peace and Security Council is expected to discuss the DRC conflict at its meeting this weekend. And joining us now is Liesl Louw-Vaudran, Senior Advisor with the International Crisis Group. A very good afternoon to you, Liesl. Thank you very much for your time. The Peace and Security Council of the AU is going to discuss this matter, but not everyone is holding their breath given the performance or how the AU's Peace and Security Council, but also regional bodies like your SADC, have sort of tended to deal with these matters even in times of crisis.
Yes, good afternoon, Vuyo. Thanks for having me. It's true there's a lot of skepticism because during the meeting between the East African community and SADC the other day in Dar es Salaam, there was also a call for a ceasefire and it was broken almost immediately or just the next day, you know. So now, this evening, the heads of state of the Peace and Security Council, the 15 members, and then others who are, you know, concerned by this Eastern DRC conflict will meet. We don't know yet if President Felix Tshisekedi will be there. He is a member of the Peace and Security Council. The DRC is. Rwanda is not a member, but President Paul Kagame might be here. He'll certainly be here tomorrow when there's the big, you know, actual annual summit of all the heads of state. So, as you say, you know, we can probably just expect them to again call for a ceasefire, but what really needs to happen is that these two leaders should also discuss and, you know, Rwanda should withdraw its support for the M23 eventually, because that's something that at least the DRC wants. And from the other end, you know, the mediator, President João Lourenço from Angola, has also asked now for the DRC to talk to the M23. So from all sides, they're trying to get dialogue going between Rwanda and the DRC, get Rwanda to withdraw its support, and then for talks with the M23. So there's not much really beyond that the leaders can do, you know, to impact the situation on the ground.
Realistically, does anyone see Rwanda withdrawing its support of the M23?
No. I mean, that has been, you know, the huge, I'd say, game changer or the change of this situation compared to where you remember in 2012, 2013, we had almost an identical situation. But there were, when, you know, the M23 took Goma, there were talks. Rwanda withdrew its support. The M23 withdrew from Goma. So there's all this international pressure on Rwanda. South Africa, in the Force Intervention Brigade of the United Nations, played a big role, you know, was on the offensive with, you know, that time, offensive, sufficient offensive equipment and so on, and drove the M23 out. So now 10 years later, we're sitting with almost, as I say, identical situation. Now, but the context has changed. There isn't that much pressure on Rwanda. And in fact, it's been months and months and months now that the M23, supported by Rwanda, has occupied, you know, areas of North Kivu. And of course, you know, Rwanda has its arguments, and the M23 says that it's a legitimate Congolese organization that is fighting for the rights of Congolese Tutsis, but also, you know, minorities, etc., etc. So, I mean, there are two sides to the story, but as I say, compared to 10 years ago, now, you know, the M23 seems unstoppable.
In fact, I mean, I've watched no less than 4 interviews, past interviews that the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, has had in the recent past, and he keeps repeating what you just said, that the M23 are Congolese. Why is Felix Tshisekedi and his government, why are they refusing to speak to Congolese to resolve a Congolese problem?
Yes, I mean, he doesn't deny, though, that Rwandan troops are on the ground. I mean, in the CNN interviews and so on. It's a very complex issue, definitely. And as you say, I mean, initially, the Congolese had refused to speak to the M23. They still refuse, in a sense, because they see this as an invasion by Rwanda of Congolese territory. But the mediators, and President Lorenzo is the principal mediator, even just today in an interview said that there should be those talks with the M23. So, maybe we are nudging closer to that because the situation is becoming extremely, extremely dire, the humanitarian catastrophe. We also actually, in the last couple of days, saw the religious leaders from the DRC actually traveling to Eastern DRC and engaging on the ground with some of the groups. So maybe, there's an opportunity which, while the government still, feels that it shouldn't negotiate with the M23, there are other initiatives that might bear fruit. But I think there's a great sense of urgency currently.
Well, President Ramaphosa in Parliament the other day said that they have urged all to resume direct negotiations and dialogue, including non-state parties such as the M23 rebels. He gave us the impression that that will indeed happen. Do a lot of people share his sentiment?
Yes, I think so. I mean, as I say, I'm following the African Union summit, and there are many issues also on the table here, Sudan and so on. So in terms of the Eastern DRC, we know that there's some division, on the continent. Some are more strongly supportive of the DRC, and it's the DRC's stance to refuse this negotiations with the M23, whereas others, and I think increasingly, as you say, President Cyril Ramaphosa, definitely Kenya has been supporting that because Kenya led this Nairobi process, which was really also about non-state actors and armed groups, support those kind of negotiations with the M23. So, tonight actually at this PSC summit, there's apparently a proposal on the table for a new kind of initiative where you will have President Lorenzo will continue with this Luanda process, and then you will have a Kenyan, there's talk of Uhuru Kenyatta or others, perhaps other leaders of the continent who could then drive that discussion with the non-state actors. But it's difficult for me to see, to say, really more broadly who is siding on which, with which of these actors.
But can people like you've mentioned Uhuru Kenyatta, the former president of Kenya, but can such people really make a difference or get these people to move without other players or people leaning on certain people? In other words, without someone leaning on President Tshisekedi, of the DRC, without someone or another player leaning on President Kagame, for argument's sake?
Yes, I mean, that's the classic conundrum of these kind of peace processes, Is there a neutral actor that really is influential enough, as you say, to influence both parties? Or should we bring in, I mean, in past years, there have been a lot of US involvement actually in the Great Lakes. And that's how last year in August, there was a ceasefire that was negotiated together with US players and then, the Luanda, the Angolans. So we really just have to understand who are the most influential, who can put pressure. Of course, now the geopolitical dynamics on the African continent have changed. And here in the Horn of Africa, other states like Turkey and Qatar and so on are playing a role. In fact, there are also rumors of some of those sort of non-traditional mediators coming in, being more neutral, but having some leverage, because that's the other thing, over some of these players, and then be able to nudge them towards, dialogue and peaceful solutions. But I think what is encouraging is that the African Union and then SADC and the EAC are trying to get some kind of consensus, so that we don't divide the continent between, because that was the risk earlier, between the EAC, so 8 member states, most of East Africans, and then all of Southern Africa supporting the DRC, that would have also been very detrimental. So at least from what I see is there's a kind of a collective push to say, okay, if we all weigh in on this, and then the most influential ones, maybe there can be some peaceful solutions, but it's extremely, extremely difficult. And these, local considerations ultimately are the ones who will triumph. So, there's economic interests and political interests,
Right.
even interest in the politics in Kinshasa that play a role that here, in Addis Ababa is impossible to influence.
Liesl Louw-Vaudran, thank you very much for your time. She's a senior advisor with the International Crisis Group ahead of that meeting this weekend of the AU's Peace and Security Council. Hopefully, something will come out of it in spite of the widespread skepticism about such a possibility.